They actually formed 4 separate enterprises within one bill, and this is statutory. So this was voted on in the legislature. I don't remember.
By the way, for those who are not following, a couple years ago we passed Prop 117, which limited how much you could steal by calling something a fee and not go to the vote of the people. Said it's going to be this much, you have to go to the vote of the people. Well, this was well over that much. They just broke it up into 4 pieces.
They broke it up into 4.
And what I believe to be the most arrogant power grab I've ever seen in my years in Colorado.
Not the most arrogant. Remember when the taxpayers voted to not hurt oil and gas industries within the state? 3 or 4 months later, they came in and passed Senate Bill 181, which totally undermined and hurt, basically crucified the oil and gas industry within our state.
It really is amazing. I've never seen such hubris at the Capitol, where the people have voted one way and they, through trickery, have gone exactly the opposite way.
I think that's what happens when you have single party rule. When you have the governor and both chambers of the legislature, both the Senate and the House, controlled by the same party, they can kind of do what they want.
So the Colorado Legislature is in session, which means we talk about all these crazy important bills, abortion and gun control and this and that, but it's this bill that matters the most. It's the budget. Kim Ransom's a good friend. She sits on the JBC, which is the Joint Budget Committee, the most powerful committee there is in the history of the world. All right, let me see if I've got this right. I see the budget as the real reason we elect you. In this document is the priorities for the state. What gets funded, what doesn't get funded. All the other things are nice rule changes, law changes, this and that, but what the state does, the services it provides or doesn't provide, it's in this bill. And they call it the long bill.
The long bill.
Why do they call it the long bill?
Well, because it's pretty long. I mean, I showed you how long the actual bill is
so
here.
This isn't even the bill. This is not the bill.
It's called the narrative. This is what we call the narrative.
So this is a summary before the bill.
Yep, and then the actual bill is this. So, yes. So it's a little bit longer. And by the way, the budget is the only bill, the only job that the legislature has to pass every year. It's required that we adopt a balanced budget every year. I believe it's constitutional.
Right.
I believe it's in the Constitution.
So you don't have to pass anything else, although you put in 500 to 700 bills a year. This one has to pass one way or the other, and it has to balance, right?
Correct.
I mean, if the federal government had this, we wouldn't be in debt as a nation.
Correct.
All right. So how does it, real quickly, how does it work? I know there's a 5-member?
6.
6-member JBC, 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate, and you guys meet all friggin' year long. And one guy I knew did a study of the witnesses that came to your committee. And out of the 1,000 witnesses that came to testify, only one said we should have less money in the budget. Everybody else was asking, because this is where they come and they beg you for money. How do you handle it?
Well, I take notes on, we only have 1 day of public testimony, just so you know. The budget committee does meet. We get briefings from the staff, from the Joint Budget Committee staff. Then we move into hearings where departments come in and ask us for money. And so those are all the people you're talking about, that study, because of course, everybody wants more money. If you look at each individual department within the budget, you almost never see a decrease. Everybody wants more. Everybody wants additional money. They want additional FTE. They want new programs.
Full-time equivalent.
FTE is full-time equivalent.
Workers.
More employees. And this budget, by the way, has over 800 new state employees.
From last year?
From just in the last year.
So in 1 year, the state machinery of just state government is going to grow by 800 people.
Plus, 800 plus.
That's insane. And keep in mind, the state government is only one of 5,000 governments and special districts throughout the state.
Correct.
So,
you start thinking of counties and
cities
and
school
municipalities.
districts and
Exactly.
Park and recs. All right. So here's my big question. I'm hearing we might get a tax refund for the first time in a long time. When Ref C passed back in 2005, the TABOR limit, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights spending limit, went up substantially.
Was increased.
It was increased permanently, and it's been growing and growing and growing and growing. If that hadn't passed, some $20 billion would not have gone to the state over time. Are we getting a refund?
Yes. Currently, we show that there will be a refund. It looks like it's about $2 billion total, which comes to, here was the first set of projections. Now, we're still dealing with forecasts for this year and next year, but it looks like $333 per taxpayer.
That's a lot of money.
And that is for the sales tax portion. Without getting too much into the details and weeds, there's a three-level mechanism for refunding that $2 billion. The first is to help counties backfill the homestead exemption. So you know how seniors and disabled veterans get a discount on their property taxes. So that's the first level, backfills that. The second level lowers your income tax rate. Now this is just the rate, and it's a temporary decrease from 4.55% to 4.50%. So it's not a huge decrease, but hey, it all adds up.
But it's also just a temporary
It's
decrease.
just temporary.
So when you fill out your tax form and it looks like, I don't remember it being that low. Don't worry, it's going to go
It'll
back up.
go back up. It'll go back up. So that is the level 2. And then if we still have money of that $2 billion to go, at that point we start sending checks. And the current amount is projected to be $333 per person.
All right. This is great news.
Great
and given
news.
that it's even above this massive level from Referendum C, which took the level and did this. And then there was another, at least Referendum C, although I didn't support it, was asked. They went to the voters and said, can we permanently raise the floor for the size of government, or the ceiling for the size of government? But all the amount of fees that have been passed, what that is a trick to say that every time, I think of it like this, a whiskey barrel, and every time the money flows in and it looks like it's going to hit the top, whatever spills over is our TABOR refunds. But we forget there's this little knob at the bottom, and every time it looks like we're going to get our TABOR refunds, your friends in the legislature keep opening this up and calling something else an enterprise. And lowering the level and say, well, that's not the government anymore. And so if we did that, we would be swimming in money. These might be great enterprises, but you never asked us permission. We never gave consent to a single one of these. And in fact, you did all these, whether it's the FASTER fee or the hospital provider fee, which is a bed tax, mill levy freeze, all these, the growth, all these things, all without a vote of the people.
Well, and worse than that, they're playing shell games trying to move the money around. You remember the big transportation bill last year?
Gas? It's not a gas tax.
It's not a gas tax, it's a gas fee. That is only 1/4 of that bill, though, because they realized that everything that they were trying to do in that bill was going to be too big of an enterprise. They actually formed 4 separate enterprises within one bill, and this is statutory, so this was voted on in the legislature. I don't remember.
By the way, for those who are not following, a couple years ago we passed Prop 117, which limited how much you could steal by calling something a fee and not go to the vote of the people. It said it's going to be this much, you have to go to the vote of the people. Well, this was well over that much. They just broke it up into 4 pieces.
They broke it up into 4.
And what I believe to be the most arrogant power grab I've ever seen in my years in Colorado.
Not the most arrogant. Remember when the taxpayers voted to not hurt oil and gas industries within the state? what, 3 or 4 months later, they came in and passed Senate Bill 181, which totally undermined and hurt, basically crucified the oil and gas industry within our state.
It really is amazing. I've never seen such hubris at the Capitol, where the people have voted one way and they, through trickery, have gone exactly the opposite way.
I think that's what happens when you have single party rule. When you have the governor and both chambers of the legislature, both the Senate and the House, controlled by the same party, they can kind of do what they want.
All right, so get back to my tax refund. I'm looking forward to this. I have hungry children. I want to buy them food, and for my daughter, apparently, there's just not enough clothes ever. But
I have daughters too, so I know what you're talking about.
It seems as though they're trying to find ways not to give us our tax money back. Explain this to me.
Well, the more that they can siphon off into enterprises, the more that they can, it has to do with revenue, so it's not just spending it. So just spending the money that comes in doesn't take it away from your refund, because the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is based on
revenue that comes
in. So that money did have to be carved out for this year especially. There's nothing we can do to change those statutory requirements that I mentioned for refunding. But let me give you another little hint, little secret moving forward, is that the majority party is looking at changing that refund mechanism. So what I have heard is that as opposed to, remember I mentioned that $333, which is the current forecast amount, and that could go up or down a little bit based on what our tax revenue happens to be. Tax day's coming up in a few weeks here. We'll know a little bit more June or July, how much money Colorado taxpayers paid this year over and above the amount of growth that they're allowed to have. But if they change the statutory requirements for refunds, remember I said the 4.50, and then the sales tax would just be whatever's left over, they could change that. They could write new bills and laws to change that. And for example, they could be sending your refund to people that never paid any taxes. They could send your refund to people that don't even live here legally. They could send your refund to people that are different ages, you get my point. They could figure out ways.
The Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which applied to all the governments, the 5,000 of them running around in Colorado, so it didn't say, here's how you're going to refund this. They left it to the government. And when it came to the state, you'd think that those who paid the most in taxes would get the larger refund. Kind of like when you overpay your taxes, you get a refund. That's not how this works. So the threats to our refunds seem to be multiple pronged here. So there's a lot of fronts going to attack our refund. One, they could change the way the refund happens, and they can start redistributing to other groups. What a surprise. They want to take your money and send it to somebody else. But aren't they also doing some things to try to lower the actual amount, trying to hide, trying to make sure that this money goes to next year or this goes down here, so that that total amount that's going to be refunded also gets smaller? How are they doing that?
To some extent, they can do that. You already mentioned the enterprises. That is actually one of the next biggest ways for them to shelter, if you will, the money. But there's a shell game being played over at that Gold Dome over there, where they move money from place to place, and there'll be different cash funds here and there, and money will be spent from here. And there's a whole column within this budget that you have it's a column of redistributed funds. So that is money that is moved between departments. So for example, there's a centralized Office of Information Technology. They literally charge other departments for the IT work that they do for them. Okay. So those departments then have their money that is shifted over into that department. It's all the same place. It's all the same government. It's all the same tax dollars, but it's just moved from one department to another. And even with all the years I've been on Joint Budget Committee, all the years I've been reading, digging into this, it's hard to track that money. I pretty much have my hands around it, but it's really hard to get your brain just really wrapped around how they're
Then step back
moving
for
money.
a second. You've been doing this for about 8 years?
I've been in the legislature 8 years. I've been on the Joint Budget Committee for 4.
So obviously the population of Colorado grows. And that's why Tabor says population growth plus inflation, that's the new number. That's terrific. So I would assume, since you've been there, the population and inflation has grown to here, and the budget has grown to exactly the same amount.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh at you, John.
That was a terrible
I shouldn't laugh at you. Since the number that I heard yesterday on the floor quoted was, since I was elected, the population of Colorado has grown 7% and change, maybe 7.2%. Since I've been in the legislature, the budget has grown almost 50%.
So let me see. And by the way, inflation has only started ticking up. So you got population and inflation is here. The budget has grown to here. But somehow our refund is not this. Our refund is this because of the fees and enterprising.
The fees and the enterprises.
Well, we'll just hide this and call it an enterprise. We'll take this and call it an enterprise. It just seems so very immoral to me.
Well, they're not following the Constitution, or at least the intent of the Constitution. You know, I remember when the Taxpayer Bill of Rights passed. You know, I'm old enough to remember 1992. I was knocking on doors as well. I was very glad that it passed, and we want limited government. That's why the taxpayers, why the voters of Colorado voted it in.
Also, government can grow as large as anybody wants. All you have to do is ask for consent.
And by the way, when you just mentioned Ref C a few minutes ago, the voters of Colorado have voted many times actually to allow growth in certain areas. And if you start looking at some of the local municipalities, counties, roads, school districts throughout the entire state, there are so many times that voters have said, they've evaluated the request and said, yes, I want this.
A lot of the money that you're dealing with has been shoveled in, that has just been made up money from the feds. All right, so the feds have dumped money on Colorado and all over the place. That money has to be used, and are they trying to shovel that to future years? Where's it all going?
Okay.
$38 billion. I've never seen a budget that is $38 billion in Colorado.
Yes. First of all, it doesn't have to be used. Do you know that there are several states that just sent the money right back to the feds and said, hey, we got this, we're good, leave us alone. And I actually kept a copy of the Denver Post that talked about how we've had the highest inflation in 40 years that we're seeing now. Clearly, the reason that we are having inflation, any economist will tell you, maybe not the ones that I work with, but any economist will tell you that if you print money, you are going to have inflation. It's from Economics 101, right? That is how you get inflation.
It's not just that, it's also the regulation. I find it fascinating and very sad that the regulatory state that has happened over the last few years under the progressive control of Colorado's inflation is about 0.5 point higher than the national average. And pushing up the national average. Why? It's not just because of making up the money, it's because of getting rid of the oil and gas industry. It's about raising minimum wages. It's about the Family Leave Act, which is going to put, increase employment costs tremendous. It just keeps going and going and going, telling businesses what straws they can use and what containers they have.
Plastic bags.
The fees on gasoline and delivery fees, the taxes on gasoline, this is the Polis inflation premium for living in Colorado, is that extra 0.5%.
Indeed. Indeed. And we see that, we actually see the results of that, the negative impacts of that. 5-6 years ago, Colorado was one of the more business-friendly states in the nation. You may know the exact numbers, but
it dropped from like second to like 14th.
Right, and I think now we're even in some circles we're even lower than that. I think we're down. We're in the bottom half now. I think number 34 or something like that. So at one point, we were seen as such a business-friendly state. Part of that was Tabor. Part of it was the state itself, the low cost of living, things like that. You see so many things happening from the legislature, from the bills we are passing in the legislature that are creating a very negative environment for businesses. And they don't want to come here. The ones that are here aren't happy here. Clearly, a lot closed 2 years ago, many of which were not able to ever come back.
So I know a few things. We're battling on behalf of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights and taxpayers for the last 30 years. I can tell you that the courts here hate Tabor, and that the people you work with in that capital hate Tabor. It's not just Democrats, by the way, because when you think about it, Tabor requires you to make tough decisions about this. If you're able to keep all the money that comes in, then you can make all your constituency groups happy. But if you have to limit how much money you spend, then you have to do your job. You have to say, no, the education is more important than midnight basketball, or the roads are more important than transit. You have to make these decisions, and people won't like those decisions. No politician wants to be not liked. So I've seen that taxpayers keep getting it on the chins. The courts rule against it. The legislature does the backroom deals. We go around and do certificates of participation instead of asking permission. I'm worried about the future of Tabor, and I'm worried about what's going to happen right now that we have this refund. Because what the left likes to say is, oh, you're just going to get this little tiny refund.
$10.
$10 means a cup of coffee. Well, it's still my cup of coffee. But really, if they didn't play all those tricks, that wouldn't be $10. It would be $1,000.
Well, and this year it should be 300 plus. Right. And I actually think that that's going to be very helpful moving forward for taxpayers to realize if you hold the line, speaking to us legislators, if you hold the line, we will get these kind of refunds back. Right. And that is actually what I want the workers, the taxpayers of Colorado to see, that the Taxpayer Bill of Rights works well if you let it. And so that's kind of where I've been standing all along.
Where does most of the money go? Just real briefly, if you step back, what are the top things that are taking money?
K-12, which is now P-12, and it's quickly growing because we've added a new Department of Early Childhood, meaning they want to now have our kids in preschool, in universal preschool, right. And hold on to your hats, they're probably going to have universal daycare before too long. So far, that's not in the budget. But right. If they've moved back from full day kindergarten, which we didn't right. used to have, and then now universal preschool, they keep going younger and younger. So that's one big chunk, close to a third. Another third is basically the Medicaid piece.
The Obamacare part.
It's the Obamacare part. It's that we are paying for health care for many people that can't or don't work. It's one thing to cover the people that can't work, the IDD community, right. Or the intellectually and developmentally right. disabled. I am right there making sure that we take care of them medically. But this, clearly the Medicaid expansion now covers a lot more people.
So, with those two things you just said, you have now spent two-thirds of my tax money.
And then the other third is what we refer to as general fund, and that's basically the other third that we can work with to cover everything else, which includes, by the way, higher ed, which is a huge chunk of that as well. Higher ed, we put an awful lot of money into all the institutions of higher education and financial aid. And just in case you weren't aware of this, people that are not here legally can apply for state financial aid from your tax dollars, Jon. Your tax dollars are paying for people that do not have legal status in the United States. They can't use the FAFSA to apply for federal financial aid, but by golly, they can apply for state financial aid here in Colorado.
So there's a lot of federal aid, but they can't get federal aid. If you're here illegally, you can't get federal aid, but you can get Colorado aid.
Correct. And I'll even up one on that for you. We bought a special tool here in Colorado because they can't use the FAFSA system, which is what a lot of state universities used to use,
Right.
that you would just fill out the FAFSA and then that would apply to all the universities, all the colleges that your child was applying to.
Around the whole
state,
country.
federal,
Yeah.
the whole country. But now we have the equivalent of the FAFSA. It's a special tool that we paid for a few years ago here in Colorado to make sure that even people without Social Security numbers, without the ability to use the
They have to build a
FAFSA.
whole new platform.
So
All right.
now, and we paid for that too.
Let's wrap this up. We're finally going to get a refund. A lot of people who've been in Colorado for a long time, but haven't seen a refund. That's good, but the refund should be much, much larger than it is.
It should be far larger.
How much, if you didn't have all this, did the JBC say if we didn't enterprise, if we didn't do this, how much would that refund be?
I don't know that we've looked at that. I have to admit, I have not looked at it because there are so many items that would go into that. You can go all the way back to prior to Ref C and look at that. But then you look at all the enterprises since, especially in the last 4 years. Remember, we have really increased the number of enterprises
Well, you
in
have
the
to have
last
a much
4
better
years.
term than enterprise, because what that means is everyone likes enterprise. I mean, I very much like enterprise. So what we're really trying to say is they raised taxes without permission, and therefore you're not getting this refund back. We need to come up with a better thing, because what they said is they just pulled things out of the budget and put it on autopilot so that we couldn't get our refunds. It's really ugly. And all they have to do to keep our refunds is to ask. That's it. It's right there in the state constitution under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. You can keep all these refunds that you're trying to squirrel away in so many different little ways. All you have to do is ask.
Ask.
Yeah.
Just ask. Go to the voters, and many times voters have agreed to let the government keep a certain amount, a certain percentage, a certain levy, whatever it was, for a specific purpose.
Kim, thanks for doing what you do. I don't know how you don't lose your mind on the JBC. That's going to be one of the toughest committee polls
It's a tough
ever.
job.
But it's the most important. Thanks for doing it.
Oh, as I've always said, I'm honored to serve. There's a reason that I'm there at the legislature at all, and there's a reason that my colleagues decided to send me over to the Joint Budget Committee 4 years ago.
You got problems, lady. You got real problems.
I like numbers, you know.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.